So, welcome to Roadmap to Retirement. My name's Arthur Bush. I'm CEO of Vita Financial. I'm here along with my brother, Stephen Bush, the Chief Business Officer. I know that everybody knows Stephen and I well. Stephen and I have been practicing now for around 10, a little bit over a decade now at this point. Retirement planning is our bread and butter. So this is an area that we have a ton of resources, education, information on. We can provide, yes, throughout this workshop, but also, like I mentioned before, if there's any questions that come up, you can always reach out to us directly. So the things that we're going to go over today: first, retirement readiness; next, savings focus; next, retirement risk management strategies, Social Security, and then income planning. So for retirement readiness, this is going to be Stephen's going to talk through this part.
Yeah. And so, the first thing is why does retirement planning matter? And the very quick, easy answer to that is because, for a lot of people, that's like the primary goal, knowing what, they're going to be able to do after they're done with a career, after they're done with investing the time and energy into, building their work life. What do they do after? The fun thing is that in today's planning environment, we have, a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, all the time, we are encouraging clients to really plan for the ideal lifestyle now. 10 years ago, retirement planning for many was a pretty black and white math problem. Inflows in, outflows out, and do I have enough income to support the traditional kick up my feet? Maybe I have a country club membership, maybe I spend more time with friends and at the community center or whatever. But it used to be a bit more cookie cutter. Nowadays, people approach retirement planning with a bit more of a desire mindset. What is it that I really want to do for the long term? And the first thing that most people start to treat like a real variable is the timeline. What's their start date? Very easy example to make would be to talk about the FIRE group, which is, financial independence, retire early. I think I may even have that wrong, but it's basically centered around being very, very aggressive in minimizing your outflows now, also that you can maximize the resources you're building, and then retire at like 35 or 40. And all that sounds super aggressive, sounds impossible for many at first at face value. But when you calculate the idea that they may be living a different lifestyle than the traditional retirement, a lot of that stuff comes into focus and becomes possible. So planning for the ideal, really getting serious about your timeline and your goals, and being not only selfish in those, but also totally realistic. People, Arthur, you guys travel a lot. Uh, People go into that all the time with the wrong expectations, right? Like on average, how much do you think somebody entering into retirement should probably be planning around spending for the travel goals when we're talking to clients?
On average, you mean like the estimate? How much should they have ready for
Well,
travel?
how much do people usually go into the conversation like ready to
Uh,
spend? You know what I
Very,
mean?
very rarely, very rarely before they talk to us, obviously, but very.
Yeah, they don't even budget for it. It's just like it's a thing that's like, oh, maybe I get the Winnebago, maybe we go here, maybe we do this, but like you need to write that down. You need to build it into the plan. You need to make it a tangible goal. Because if you haven't specified, you don't even have to be right. You just have to have an idea and write it down and say, this is how much I think I need to specify spending. So timeline and goals is super important. It allows you to do the math, which is the inflows and outflows calculation, the realistic calculation. Ultimately, trying to make sure that we have all of our resource allocated and pointed in the right directions. Are we being as efficient as possible from a tax perspective? Are we using the right type of accounts? Some type of accounts are built to allow for a lot of access and liquidity and flexibility, and some aren't. So really evaluating the pros and cons on the different types of accounts and the taxation, and making sure that you're allocating the resources to the right place. All of that typically culminates into a pretty picture of here's what's possible based on your ideal lifestyle. Here's what we think we should do. Are we ready for it? And if that's a big green check mark, that's great. But the very last step of that is making sure that you have protected all of those aspects and considered the risk management of that. It does you absolutely no good to build up this big bucket of assets if it gets drained due to a healthcare issue that we didn't necessarily plan for. And that could be a child, that could be a parent, that could be yourself. There could be a lot of different aspects, but there's so many different risks and considerations that you want to consider as you enter into retirement. Even a more positive spin, intergenerational planning, legacy planning. Some people go into retirement planning with the idea that I want to make sure that there's nothing left over. I want to spend every dollar. My kids will be fine. My grandkids will be fine, and they will. A lot of times, like they're doing perfectly well, and it's not really a concern. So, how do we make sure that we are managing the risk of withdrawing assets down, being smart about the market, but not drawing down those assets too early? So, risk management and retirement planning plays a major part in evaluating readiness. But I just don't like to really talk about those things until I've had somebody think through what is the ideal and what is it that they want to make happen. So, Arthur, do you want to talk about savings and some of the resource allocation?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. So there's just like with retirement readiness and everything else regarding retirement, there's multiple things to consider when we're focusing our saving strategies towards that specific goal. Stephen mentioned budgeting as an example, which is the fourth smart budgeting techniques. A lot of times things get overlooked. Healthcare expenses, your travel expenses, emergencies, weddings, things like that for kids, grandkids, assets to pass, stuff that just we don't expect. A power of compound interest, tax advantaged accounts, catch up contributions being other ones. Compound interest is one of those things that if we don't take advantage of it today, it's dramatically going to affect us later. Compound interest is something that we can also somewhat control. I know the market is variable. The market's going to go up, the market's going to go down. We can't really predict which way it's going to go. One thing that we do know, though, is that inflation will be constant. Inflation will always continue to eat away at our portfolios, and it'll be detrimental to our portfolios if we're not utilizing compound interest to push past that. Compound interest being how does my interest accumulate over time, stack on top of each other from year to year to year to year. If we, for example, I know inflation was a hot topic over the past couple of years, and it still is today. If you, for example, have an inflationary rate of 2.5%, but your portfolio is only getting 2%, then now we're losing out to that purchasing power risk. We're losing out to that inflation, and it can cause some problems for us for our budget later down the road. Opposite side of that coin is if we're getting a 7 to 8 to 10% rate of return on our assets, and inflation is at 2.5%, we're outpacing that problem. So now as the purchasing power risk or as the cost of goods and services continues to increase over time, we can outpace that and make sure that we can cover our expenses. With the tax advantaged accounts, there's multiple different types of accounts out there that are available inside of our tax code. Of course, the ones that people are most familiar with is your IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks. Outside of that, you do have your deferred compensation plans depending on your employer. There's subsets of 401ks or similar to 401ks with 403bs, 401as, 457 plans, and so on and so on and so on. Each of those types of accounts, the definition tax advantaged also means that there's going to be if this, then this type rules. If we're making contributions to an IRA, for example, a traditional IRA, sure, we get the income deferral, but upon distribution, we are going to have to pay a tax liability. Roth IRA being the complete opposite of that. We pay taxes putting the money into the account. Once we start taking distributions, the assets are tax-free. The income is tax-free. There's lots of implications in the consideration on what type of account that you want to invest in or want to put your assets towards. An example that I like to discuss with people, or something to consider, is that during your working years, it's your highest income earning years that you're going to see, which also implies it's the highest income tax liability years that you're going to see. During retirement years is drastically different than that. You're not earning the same amount of income. Social Security probably makes up a significant portion or a large portion of it. Maybe you have some pensions, qualified distributions, things like that to supplement that income. If we're expressing or looking at those differences, income tax liability, somebody in their working years earning excess of $250,000, $300,000 of income could pay somewhere upwards of 20 to 25% effective tax liability. Upon retirement at age 65, now they're paying a 7 to 10. So drastically different there in terms of that tax liability. Tax advantaged accounts, once we start taking distributions, remember we have to pay that income tax. Income tax liability distribution on a 25% rate is drastically different than something on a 7 to 10. So making sure that we're understanding what's available, the rules that exist in today's landscape, and how they can impact my financial planning or retirement planning at a later date. Catch-up contributions happen at age 50. At age 50, we can start making additional contributions to our accounts, so we can quite literally catch up for our needs. 401ks, for example, they increased, I think it's $11,250 for 2025 if you're above the age of 50. Roth IRAs all have the same rules. If we know that our time horizon at age 60 to 65 is nearing for retirement, then we know that we need to make some additional contributions. Those rules really, really help us out. One thing to consider, I'd mentioned tax liability quite a bit. One thing that there was an article recently that came out about this, where people making the wrong choices on distributions of their tax advantaged accounts, or not properly planning for their retirement income streams. There's an estimated amount of assets lost in forgotten 401ks, or rollovers, or assets distributed of roughly $1.65 trillion in circulation. It's a significant chunk of change that's out there that people just don't know exist, or they're doing the wrong things in terms of distributions. So being careful, knowing and understanding the landscape, knowing and understanding how market dynamics work and everything associated with it will absolutely help in terms of retirement planning. Smart budgeting techniques. I know I went backwards. I know I did that one first, but one thing to bring back to the tax liability, and a thing that people oftentimes forget to consider inside of their budget, is the tax liability. If we're not preparing for that in retirement, it's going to significantly sway, or could significantly sway, our expectations. There's a phrase that we like to use often, and just like every phrase that is in existence, somebody much smarter said it than I did, and I don't know who it was, and I can't quote them by name. But when it comes to retirement planning, it has nothing to do with what you earn. It has everything to do with what you keep. The proper types of retirement planning will absolutely help you make sure that you keep as much of those assets as possible. And with that, I'm going to switch over to Stephen, who's going to work through retirement risk management strategies.
It's a perfect segue because this first block up here, risk management basics, a lot of people will go towards sequence of withdrawal risks, or market volatility, which is a separate one on here. One that I would actually lean towards is lack of information. Are you properly informed? Like Arthur, you were just going through the different types of taxation. I would add to that as information is becoming more accessible, tools are increasing exponentially in capability, and just the amount of things out there where people can inform themselves so much more on just the basics of retirement planning, investment planning, savings planning. And so, like, just to tell a very a pretty telling story, in 2021, it was a study done, in 2021, 40% of non-retirees thought they were on track for retirement. 27% of Americans reported that they decreased or stopped retirement contributions in the wake of COVID-19. And by 2022, 57% of Americans reported losing sleep due to retirement savings stress. And in 2023, last but not least, that number of non-retirees that thought they were on track, that was originally 40% in 2021, had reduced to 31% in 2023. So a 10% reduction in people with the confidence that their retirement was on track. That sounds like risk to me. And I think that, there are a lot of things that can be done around informing yourself, using retirement calculators, using the tools out there to really figure out, do I have the asset base, or am I expected to have the asset base that I'm going to need to be able to retire? Because retirement is all about longevity. Nobody wants to end up at age 90 or the end of life without a dollar in the bank. People want to make sure that they have peace of mind. They want to have security, financial stability, and security. And so managing those risks takes tact and intention, but it can be done. So the first thing that we're typically talking through with clients in relation to retirement risk is, are we saving money in the right place, which Arthur was just going through? And then two, how do we manage the market volatility on the inside of those buckets? We like to think of things in terms of liquidity tiers. And just the closeness that we have to needing the money and the purpose of the money. So if I were to ask everybody, you have a savings account, is that savings account for retirement? Or is your 401k for retirement? Your immediate thing in your head would be like, well, that's my 401k. My response would be, yeah, but it's all money. So like at the end of the day, it's all an asset that can be accessed for retirement planning. Whether or not you have it positioned properly and invested properly is really contingent upon what your needs are, what planning for the ideal, and that retirement readiness, that checklist we were going through earlier. The next thing, that the risk that we're trying to make sure we manage is long-term health considerations. Are we being smart about the reality of our healthcare concerns? Do we need to consider caretaking for any elder parents or siblings or friends or children, again, beyond yourself? I would encourage everyone to go visit. Genworth is a company that does this huge study every year on cost of private room nursing care facility, in-home nursing care facility cost. Just they have this plethora of data and insights related to long-term healthcare considerations, and it allows you to get pretty granular. You can look at it based on state, you can look at it based on national average, but I would encourage everyone to go look at that tool and plug in your hypothetical scenario of what age you may, or sorry, what a situation may be for you when you're an age that this may be of concern, which Arthur, correct me if I'm wrong, but is like mid 70s to early 80s, I think, is probably when we see this arising. The really tough thing about long-term health considerations is an average claim, an average situation typically is about 2.5 to 3 years of somebody needing support. But that could be 20 years, depending on what the situation is and what the healthcare status is for you. So it's one of those things where we want to be really tactful of, are we planning for longevity by considering this realistically? The last risk management piece that we have a deep dive comprehensive discussion on is legacy, estate and legacy planning. So are we avoiding probate as much as possible? Are we structuring our assets in a way where they are easy for us to get to while we are in retirement, but also easy for that next generation to access? And so are we structuring the legal instruments, beneficiary arrangements, transfer on death arrangements? Are we titling our homes property? Arthur, I actually would ask if you could speak on this for a moment. This particular bullet point, it's very interesting. When it comes to retirement planning, nobody thinks about the family dynamic of intergenerational wealth transfer. And so could you speak towards like having conversations with clients, sometimes navigating that conversation? Because we have some pretty interesting conversations through that process.
Yeah. If there's an expectation or a desire to leave assets to kids, grandkids, things like that, it could dramatically affect your retirement income. There's also some considerations to make if you think that you are going to be paying up a generation and the future generation for long-term care, chronic care needs, or even some supplemental of retirement income for that individual at a later date. There's absolutely some implications to your own income, to your own assets and everything. So intergenerational planning is crucial even for our retirees, especially as we start to navigate right now, just in history, over the next 15 years, and we're currently in it. We're in the largest wealth transfer than we've ever seen, from baby boomers starting to pass assets to kids and grandkids. The largest wealth transfer. There's trillions and trillions of dollars in circulation. The introduction of 401ks, for example, I was talking about the types of accounts that are available today. You look back into the 1970s, 401ks, people didn't really have them. They weren't even around at the time. They had pensions. Pensions, when a person passes, don't pass to kids or grandkids. 401ks do. So the introduction of some of these types of accounts that exist, 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, and everything like that, did not exist in previous generations. And now we have massive implications for the actual wealth transfer. Anytime there's massive implications, that also means there's potential massive tax liabilities. So it's something to consider, something to discuss. Stephen, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, and certainly a reality too, like as we've seen ourselves, the development of ERISA's, Secure Act 2.0, we will absolutely see a Secure Act 3.0, I'm sure, during this administration. And so, there's so many changes coming to the employer retirement space. Even the catch-up contribution, the rules around that used to be age 50, you were entitled to a certain amount, but now it's age 50, you're entitled to a certain amount. And if you're age 60, 61, 62, 63, something of that nature, but it's complex. It's not simple to navigate. And so, yes, I would say like navigating that risk of intergenerational wealth transfer, especially as Arthur mentioned, there are trillions of dollars that are transferring from now until 2045. I can't remember the exact number, but we actually wrote about that in a recent piece, if I'm remembering. And so, yes, it's a huge risk to really have to consider, which brings me to how do we navigate managing risk in retirement planning? A lot of these things were centered around sentiment or desires or lifestyle, but I want to focus a little bit on the actual resources and the math, because it is important to focus on how you make retirement happen. There is quite a few, really well-known people in the field that have done retirement planning type work for a long time, income-based planning type work. So there's all types of sayings out there. But I think one of the most important ones out there, like Arthur said, is it's not what you earn, it's what you keep. And so like designing passive income streams, planning around your guaranteed income, Social Security, because it's kind of the first, I'll say, line of defense for this, because most people qualify for Social Security. As a matter of fact, 9 out of 10 people over the age of 65 received Social Security benefits in 2023. It accounted for about 30% of older adults' income in 2023. And, it's a significant resource for not just the retirement population, but I also want to highlight the living with disabilities population. Like people don't think about Social Security as a disability income pool, but it has significant implications and support for survivors and for kids and widows. And so it's a really important linchpin to just the economic system and what people really rely on. And so let's talk about that for a moment. The way that you qualify for Social Security, they take the highest 35 years of earnings, and they take out all the zeros, and there's a cap on how much you could be credited each year that you're earning, but you're given these work credits, and that benefit calculation is based on the highest 35 years of your earnings. So Let's talk about what that number is. In 2023, like I said, 9 out of 10 people over the age of 65 receiving Social Security. So in your mind, you think, wow, that probably has a pretty big impact on the economy. The average monthly Social Security benefit for retired workers in 2023 was only $1,874. And so while it is a significant component of the retirement income system and what people rely on for peace of mind in retirement, it probably doesn't pay out some of the benefits that people need in a lot of ways. So the eligibility, you work, they calculate what you earn, but what that calculation is has been changed, and that formula has been changed over the years, and it will probably continue to undergo changes as things develop, and it's important to keep eyes on that. The biggest question that we get related to Social Security, other than just how much is it, which, quick plug, go to ssa.gov. They have a really excellent website that has your benefits record. It will show you those highest 35 years that I was just referring to. You can go see what they're giving you credit for, what your expected benefits are, not just if you're retired, but also if you needed Social Security disability. So ssa.gov is a pretty high-powered website that I think provides some really good information. But the biggest question that we get, other than how much is when can I start it? When to claim benefits? And the quickest, easiest answer is that it is completely dependent upon your situation. Reason why I can answer it simply like that is because they've made the system so complex that it isn't as simple as you start on this date at this age. You can begin pulling Social Security at age 62. For most people, your full retirement age is at age 67. And your full retirement age is the age where you are receiving the total benefit that the calculation has you entitled to. If you wait every year, you're waiting to draw beginning at age 62 all the way until 70, you can expect an annualized increase of about 6 to 8% on your benefit. Now, the reason why understanding the earliest age of 62 and the full retirement age of 67 is really important is because if you turn on your benefit before your full retirement age and you are continuing to earn other income, it may have negative impacts on the total benefit that you receive. You may be forced to give up a portion of your benefit if you determine to turn on Social Security early and still earn income elsewhere. If you're at your full retirement age, there is no reduction of benefit based on your other income. You may have the maximum amount of your benefit taxed, but it may not be reduced to a penalty. The next thing that I would focus on is spousal and survivor benefits. The easiest thing to point to when it comes to spousal Social Security benefit is that you are entitled to half of your spouse's benefit, regardless of what yours is. And so if my spouse has a Social Security benefit of $5,000 and my Social Security benefit is only $2,000, I may be entitled to $2,500 because it is half of my spouse's Social Security benefit. The problem, Arthur, is that are they going to tell you that unless you ask them in most cases?
No, absolutely not.
The Social Security office is basically like the DMV. You need to be armed with this information when you go talk to them. And ultimately, culminates into tax implications. You're earning, this is income. You have income coming into the household. This is not, VA benefits that are non-taxable. This is not, dividend mutual or municipal bond dividend income. Like this is income. So tax implications, making sure that you really understand what percentage of your benefit is taxed is important. And which brings me to the changes that are happening right now. There are massive, massive changes to the Social Security system that were literally just signed into place January 5th, right? The Social Security Fairness Act. The most immediate or the biggest change that seems most tangible to me is the elimination of or repealing the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, the WEP and the GPO for public sector employees. Typically, because you may have a pension through that public sector job, your Social Security benefit could be reduced. So a lot of times, like we would do planning for teachers, federal employees, just people that had public sector pensions and benefits. We would do planning for them. And our explanation that they were not going to receive Social Security was the first time they had heard of that, which is a major concern. So eliminating the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset does appear to is anticipated to have a pretty positive impact and an immediate increase in more than 2.5 million retirees are expected to receive some sort of increase by the end of December 2025. And so it's a substantial impact. The other thing is the cost of living adjustment, which does happen every year. I believe it was a 2.5% increase in 2025. And then the again, full retirement age and the payroll tax cap, which are also just really important elements to long-range Social Security planning and calculating your benefit. Those changes are occurring and have gone up just like they go up every year as well. So lots of changes for Social Security. The best advice that I can give everyone on the call is to go to ssa.gov, pull your benefit, understand those benefits, and then talk to a planner that has a good understanding of Social Security planning, which brings us into the income planning side, Arthur.
Thank you, Stephen. For creating a retirement paycheck, there's a gentleman by the name of Tom Hegna who is real big in the financial space, writes a good amount of books and does a good amount of public speaking specific towards retirement planning. There's a phrase that he uses, which is also the title of one of his books, Paychecks and Playchecks. I have to make sure that I cite him specifically there because I do remember that one. So paychecks and playchecks, the basic concept of it is whenever you retire, you have to make sure that you have multiple different income streams. Some of your income streams will cover your paychecks, that'll cover your bills, your fixed expenses, the things you need to survive. The other side of that coin is the playchecks, and the playchecks are the assets that we'll use to cover our variable expenses, the things that we want to do. To tie into the last bullet point of every day is Saturday, that is a phrase that we use very often as well, because when you retire, you don't wake up and go to work anymore. You don't have somebody, a boss that you have to answer to. Every day feels very much like Saturday, and sometimes the expenses go up. So we have to make sure that we're identifying to go back to some previous slides on our budgeting and what it is that we want to save for. Our saving strategies, creating those paychecks and creating those playchecks are crucial, making sure that we're saving enough assets to cover our income needs. Social Security, now it cannot be the only form of income that we have coming into the household. We have to have some supplement. We have to have some other assets. And some other assets available are those account types that I mentioned earlier with Roth IRAs, IRAs, 401ks. One that I didn't mention because of the tax treatment was on the just traditional brokerage accounts, taxable brokerage monies, which is very different than your 401ks or IRAs. You can purchase the same position, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever it is that you want inside of brokerage accounts. The main difference is taxes are not deferred on growth. You have to pay the capital gains. But knowing and understanding the different types of accounts available, what you can make contributions to are crucial for creating and supplementing your retirement income. For withdrawal strategies, being strategic on where you pull income from at what specific time. It does not make sense, for example, financially, for somebody who's earning the most amount of income that they're going to earn and paying the largest amount of tax liability that they're going to pay to also start to take withdrawals from their accounts that are tax deferred, like an IRA or a 401k. Different than a Roth IRA, but like an IRA, traditional IRA, and a traditional 401k. Reason being is you're taking those assets out in the highest income tax liability at that specific time. So withdrawal strategies, making sure that you take heavy consideration into the tax liability of the withdrawal at that specific date or time. Most retirees, just based off of data, retire between the ages of 61 and 65. I think I saw it was 51% or roughly 50% retire between the ages of 61 and 65. But there are some people that like to retire before that. One of the problems with our tax deferred accounts, or the accounts that are available, is that if we touch those assets before the age of 59 and a half, then we have to pay a 10% early withdrawal penalty. We have to pay a penalty in order to access those assets, which implies that it's not very efficient for us to start taking assets early from those accounts. There's withdrawal strategies available where you can do something called 72T, where you can start to take distribution, substantial equal payments a little bit earlier than that, than the age 59 and a half. But again, we have very high considerations that we have to make in order to make sure we're strategic with those strategies. I was talking to somebody recently about the difference between taxable brokerage accounts and IRAs, and how the tax treatment flips or could potentially flip during your retirement income years. That example I was giving earlier of income tax liability during your working years between 20 to 25%, then during your retirement years between 7 to 10. If you save all of your assets towards non-qualified monies that have capital gains or taxable brokerage accounts, your taxable gains rate could be between 15 and 20%. So just based off of the numbers, it's not always efficient just to focus assets towards taxable brokerage monies so we can take advantage of the capital gains, because your income tax liability could potentially be less at that specific time. You never want to focus 100% on one strategy. You always want to have a combination of a multitude of them. There's also, I know we've discussed the bucketing at some point, bucketing strategy, putting assets in qualified monies or income tax liability monies, putting assets in cash monies that we've already paid tax on, and then putting assets in our capital gains monies. If you have equal buckets there and you need to take assets or pour some of the water out of that bucket, it's much easier to make that decision when they're on equal levels, as opposed to having to only use my taxable monies or having to only use my income tax liability assets.
Hey, Arthur, I'd like to add to, it's fun. It's kind of fun whenever we talk about estate planning. The conversation oftentimes is like, you can leave assets to a few different parties, somebody that you care about, an entity that you care about, or the government. And typically, like, people don't want to do the last one, but they do want to figure out how to leave it to like somebody they care about, family, spouse, kids, whatever, or an entity that they care about. And I think that a lot of times there's a lost opportunity for people while they're alive here to do income planning around distributing wealth and charitable strategies. So like QLAC, right? Qualified longevity annuity type contracts where you're taking income, bypassing your own taxes, donating that money, and making your tax situation a little bit more advantageous for yourself, but also accomplishing some longer range goals you may have in giving. So like, when it comes to income planning, a lot of times people plan around like, does that income mean for me? But what I would just encourage people to reframe or reorient around is just income has to be distributed regardless because of RMDs and the other things that you were talking about. That's just an asset. Who is it going to? And I think that's a extra planning point that a lot of times people don't think about until they go through the process.
Yeah, and I know people most times or oftentimes will make a joke about the last dollar they spend is the last dollar they want to earn. So they want to pass with no assets. If you do it correctly, that's nearly impossible. You're going to pass assets to somebody, and being strategic again with your withdrawal strategies and everything else will help formulate that plan for how, when, where, all of those things. Next is for annuities and pensions. The phrase annuities sometimes scares people because annuities previously honestly got a little bit of a bad rap. I know everybody's heard the commercials, the 877 cash now, JG Wentworth type commercials. Really, what I feel like was the biggest problem is that annuities, there wasn't enough education or information around them, and they were being sold in the wrong instances for the wrong things at the wrong time to the wrong people. Annuities and pensions are really somewhat similar. Social Security, for example, is just a giant pension. It's a guaranteed form of income that's going to come into the household through the rest of your life. Annuities is Social Security, excuse me, could also be called an annuity because they're very similar in terms of their functionality. Some employers, for example, where they'll have assets from a previous pension plan that has rolled into portable pension plans, which ultimately is just an annuity quite literally by definition. They are annuities. Annuities absolutely have a place in somebody's financial planning needs. The concept of creating a retirement paycheck, for example, with your paychecks and playchecks. By definition, annuities and pensions will guarantee an income based off of the rules in the contract for the rest of your life and or a spouse's life, depending on how the contracts work. They're the only companies that can issue guarantees, which is a very, very important point of them. So if we know that we need $5,000 a month of income, for example, coming in for the rest of my life to cover my expenses, my mortgage payments, or my health care, whatever it is, annuities and pensions are a way to do that. Your paychecks or your playchecks money is your more variable assets, which could be brokerage monies, could be the assets that you're keeping for a later date. Inflation proofing your plan. I discussed this during the compound interest or the necessity of compound interest. There's lots of ways to do that. A common mistake that I see of retirees, and Stephen actually referenced this in some of his COVID-19 data, is that they get so conservative that they put all their assets to cash, or they buy all gold or silver, or they pull all of their assets out of their 401ks or IRAs, and they'll just keep it in their money market, checking, savings, whatever. The detriment to your retirement planning there is almost impossible to state because we're losing out on the potential for growth, and inflation will absolutely kill a portfolio. It'll ruin the potential purchasing power for you later down the road. How do you inflation proof your plan? There's multiple different ways to do it. You have to make sure that you have an appropriate asset allocation based off of your time horizon and your age. It's hard, for example, for a 65-year-old who's retired and earning a fixed income and watching their assets start to draw down to expose all of their assets to the S&P 500 or towards 100% of an index. That yes, the returns will be good, but the losses will also be very, very bad. The other side of that coin is what I mentioned of being way, way too conservative and losing out on inflation. You have to make sure that you're measuring the proper asset allocation, which is what we would assist with. Make sure that we're picking a portfolio that makes the most sense for a retiree. It doesn't always make sense if we're tracking or expecting to get a 12 to 15% rate of return on a retirement portfolio. That's what our desire is. Then we potentially could have some issues with that risk once we start doing our withdrawals. But the inflation proofing part is important. Quick action steps here. An easy one, a shameless plug for us. Go to www.vitafinancial.com, visit the website, look at our Insights tab. Inside of our Insights tab, we'll publish articles, we'll furnish content throughout the month, throughout the year that's applicable to retirement planning, general financial planning, whatever it is. If you track our Facebook pages, our LinkedIn pages, social media, we publish those same articles there. That's content that's written by us in our voice and everything like that. So it's a great way for you to get some education. Another quick action step, if you want to do a retirement pulse check with us, you know that you can always reach out, schedule an appointment with me or Steven or somebody from the team. We can schedule some time. If you're using eMoney properly as well, it's hard, obviously, because of timing. We're not everybody is available at every second of the day. eMoney, however, and some of the systems that we use, we can be in your living room or on your computer screen every second of the day. The power of those systems and the ability to communicate effectively, regardless of the time, is understated. So a quick action step is absolutely go in and check your progress, check your goals tab, check whatever it is that you need on eMoney. Reach out to us with any discrepancies or questions that you might have, and we'll make sure that we can get them fixed as quickly as possible. For avoiding common mistakes, I mentioned earlier on the $1.65 trillion of assets left to problems with rollovers or IRAs that people just don't know that are in existence. A very easy one is make sure that you're tracking your progress. Make sure that you have a good temperature check on what you have going on financially. It's very hard. We see it often on the financial planning space where we walk into households and they'll have 30 different accounts between them and their spouse. It is almost impossible to know where you're going if you don't know where you're at. And with that much distribution, it's very, very difficult to track progress. So consolidation is an extremely important thing to make sure that you can stay on track and track that progress. I'd say I saw, this was a while ago, this was maybe 10 to 15 years ago, but there was an article at one point talking about the average American has 1,000 unique logins for their banks, for their Facebook, for Instagram, for everything. Every system that you have has a unique login. I can almost bet now 15 years later, that could be double the amount of stuff that's out there. It's very, very hard for us to track you individuals, all of us, to track what's going on and to know and understand what's available. So again, the consolidation efforts are extremely important. Building confidence in your plan is something that we can absolutely help out with. I know people on the call are familiar with eMoney and the systems and how we can track probability of success and using the proper mechanics inside of eMoney to accomplish your needs. One thing to reference my previous slide on taking risk, and Stevens actually on taking risk, is we want to make sure whenever we're building out financial plans that we're somewhat conservative with our assumptions. For example, if I'm assuming that a client can retire at age 50 instead of age 55, but I'm also assuming that that client's going to get a 15% rate of return on their portfolio throughout the rest of their life, that can absolutely run into some issues or problems. It's just not realistic. So building confidence in your plan is having a level of conservatism with your advice and counsel, which is something inherently intrinsic to our process. So with that, I think that we will wrap up for the evening. We have about 10 minutes left, so getting out a little bit early. I want to make sure that I thank everybody for their time and spending with us. It's not lost on me. It's 6:20 p.m. On a Thursday. If you're spending time with us now, that means you made the decision to say no to something else. And that really, really means a lot to us as a company, as a firm, as a family, as everything. I really, really appreciate everybody coming. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can always shoot us an email. You can always contact us and we can make sure that we get the information that you need. There is going to be a short survey. If you could hang behind for just a minute, answer a couple questions. I think it's only 3 questions. If you can answer that, that would be extremely helpful to us to make sure that we can continue to make these better. Ultimately, these are supposed to be a value add, make sure we can release information, prompt some additional questions from you guys, and make sure that the team is available to answer them for you. So with that, we can close out. I appreciate again everybody's time, and we will see you at the next meeting.